Rina had just arrived at her grandmother's old house located at the edge of a remote village. The house stood majestically, despite being over 100 years old. Surrounding the house, lush trees seemed to protect it from the outside world. As soon as she stepped inside, a cold air greeted her, even though the weather outside was quite warm. The old wooden floor creaked with every step she took, as if the house itself had a life of its own. In the dark living room, she found an old wooden box covered in dust. Driven by a strong sense of curiosity, Rina opened the box. Inside, an antique doll lay there. Its face had started to fade, wearing a dirty dress with a grim expression. As her hand touched the doll, an intense coldness spread through her body, making her shiver. The doll seemed ordinary, but there was something strange about it. An uneasy feeling began to creep over her. She placed the doll on the table, but for some reason, it felt as though the doll was staring at her with its empty eyes. On the first night in the house, heavy footsteps began to echo from upstairs. Rina woke up with her heart pounding. She knew for certain that she was alone in the house. The sound grew clearer, as if getting closer. The footsteps felt so real, creaking on the old wooden floor. Gathering her courage, Rina decided to check upstairs. However, there was no one there, only a thick silence. The next day, as she walked back into the living room, she sensed something was wrong. The doll, which had originally been placed on the table, was now in the center of the room, as if it had been moved without anyone touching it. Rina felt confused and scared, but she tried to ignore it. But the following night, whispers began to grow clearer, calling her name. The voice got closer, almost like a woman gently calling her, yet with an eerily unsettling tone. Rina had no idea where the voice was coming from, and as time passed, fear began to take over her. Feeling threatened, Rina decided to learn more about the house and the doll. She went to the village library and met an elderly resident who knew about the house's history. The resident, with a face full of unease, explained that the house once belonged to the Amara family, a young woman known for her extraordinary beauty. However, the family mysteriously disappeared several years ago. The village grew silent about the incident, but rumors lingered that Amara had been involved in dark practices and that the spirits of her family were trapped within the house. Rina felt her fear deepen. She also learned that the doll was a symbol of a trapped spirit, a bridge for Amara's spirit to reach the human world. It turned out that the doll was not just an inanimate object, but a vessel for a dark force that had endured for years. From that moment, Rina no longer felt safe in the house. The nights grew increasingly terrifying, filled with a relentless sound of footsteps echoing throughout the house. The whispers became more intense, as if calling out to her, inviting her to join the darkness of another world. Unable to bear the growing tension, Rina decided to seek the help of a renowned psychic in the village. With great anxiety, she followed the psychic's lead in a ritual to free the house from Amara's spirit. That night, the house, usually so quiet, felt even darker, and a cold wind began to blow for no apparent reason. The psychic began lighting black candles and arranging strange, unfamiliar ritual objects around them. However, as time passed, the atmosphere grew increasingly out of control. Strange sounds began to emerge, like laughter shattering the silence, and the wind whirled rapidly. The lit candles suddenly extinguished, leaving an eerie darkness. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and the doll began to move on its own, making its way to the center of the room, defying the ritual. The tense moment reached its peak when the temperature in the room dropped drastically, and Rina's body began to feel heavier. She felt as if something was holding her back, pulling her into the darkness. At that moment, a loud cry echoed through the house, and her vision shifted like a shadow of a woman fading into the darkness. The psychic struggled fiercely, but the power of Amara's spirit felt overwhelming, and Rina felt herself becoming trapped in a world she could not understand. After hours of tension, the psychic finally managed to complete the ritual and believed to have banished Amara's spirit, or so they thought. Rina felt a slight relief, but her fear was far from gone. A few days later, Rina returned to the house to collect her belongings. However, this time the atmosphere of the house felt even stranger. Every step she took echoed throughout the entire house. As she stood in front of the mirror, Rina saw the reflection of a woman who looked very familiar standing behind her. She turned around, but there was no one there. Rina stared at the mirror again, and Amara's face began to blur, replacing her own. Unbeknownst to her, Amara's spirit had not only been trapped in the doll, but had also entered Rina herself. Rina was now trapped in a deeper curse. She was not just a part of the house, but also bound to the spirits she had tried to avoid. The doll, once thought to be harmless, had now become a symbol of an inescapable curse, as Amara's crying voice echoed once more. Rina realized she would never be free from that dark power.